Aw, you and you're gonna make me blush.
What's architecture really about? Archispeak is a show that dares to peek under the architectural kimono, exposing what architecture really is, what it is that architects really do, and show you why we are passionate about our chosen profession. I'm Evan Troxel. Join Neal Pan, Cormac Phelan, and me as we have a casual conversation about all things architecture, which includes all the stuff people don't talk about. Think you already know what architecture is really about? Tune in to find out. It's time for some Archispeak.
So, welcome to episode 9 of the Archispeak podcast. I'm Neal Pan.
I'm Evan Troxel.
And I'm Cormac Phelan.
And on this episode, we're going to talk about Evan's 3D printing. And we're also going to talk about an interview that Archispeak did, actually, and probably go along into some digital stuff that's been floating around in our heads. So why don't we get it started with Evan, or actually I think it was Cormac. You were going to ask us some questions about the interview we did.
All right, so you guys, we were all supposed to have an interview this past week, but unfortunately I had to bail out, which was somewhat ironic that the topic that everybody was talking about was marketing and architecture, and that's exactly what we had to do, is, get out and get some jobs landed. And so you guys had, and, I just finished watching it not too long ago, great conversation with Eric Bobrow, and I just wanted to find out, get you guys' take on how you guys thought it went and what you guys talked about.
Well, Eric originally contacted us through the website, through archispeakpodcast.com, and he wanted to line up having us on this live video webinar thing that he does once a month, I guess. And before us, he's had Mark LePage on there from Entrepreneur Architect, and he's had quite a few people that are all basically talking about how architects can get the word out about their firms online. So he does a lot of work with firms revolving around their websites and technology, and he does a lot of coaching and stuff like that. So when he invited us to be on there, I thought it would be interesting to talk about that, because we're pretty involved in Twitter and Facebook and our website with the podcast, and we're trying to get the word out about what working in the field's really like. And so it seemed like a pretty good fit. And so when he invited us on there, I thought it would be kind of fun to do. And so when we fired up the computers this last week, and it was a video webinar, and he kind of led the conversation, and he had a bunch of people in attendance live, which was pretty cool to kind of field questions as we went along and pull up the various things that we are actively into right now. And, we've had a lot of good feedback so far. I think it overall, it went pretty cool. And Neal was talking a lot about how we use the various social media, and I was talking about the website, and we were just basically talking about some of the tools that we use to do our jobs. And so there was a lot of questions related around those types of things.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, actually. I think I realized why we do this podcast as an audio podcast, though, because I had to keep staring at my screen and making sure my eyes weren't wandering around, looking at different things on my screen, or like when either Eric or Evan during the video podcast, there's 3 little windows that show up that shows everybody's video. And so, of course, just naturally, when you're listening to either Evan or Eric talk, my eyes naturally, gravitated towards their video, which meant that my eyes were looking over at one side or the other of my screen. And so that was a challenge to keep my eyes focused in the center. I kept moving the window around so that the person who was talking was in the center. So, but it was fun. I think everybody should go take a listen. It's a little bit of inside baseball about how we do the podcast or how it started as well. So, and then there's some more conversation. I know after Evan had to leave, there was a little bit at the end there where Eric and I talked a little bit about the website house and how I do my website, and then also the software we use to host our site. So that it's all pretty fascinating. I encourage everybody to go check it out.
And we'll have a link to that on the show notes, right? So just so everybody, if you're following along near a computer, you can go to archispeakpodcast.com and click on episodes, and episode 9 will have the links for things that we're talking about during this podcast.
Well, I know there was a lot of talk about, marketing, how you market yourself as an architect and things like that. Was there anything that stood out that, Eric teaches a class and everything else for marketing for architects? And is there anything that you guys thought were interesting and creative ideas that aren't things that are standard practice with what you guys are doing?
I don't know about if there's anything that wasn't necessarily standard practice. There's definitely some things that we all should be doing, and like following up with clients on a semi-regular basis, just to, if you get a call from somebody, follow up with them. You send out a proposal, follow up with them. Those are some basic things, but sometimes we're not very good at doing those things. I know we also talked a little bit about how you can engage people a little bit more with your website, and some thoughts and ideas about how to get people to revisit your website instead of just taking a quick glance and going, oh yeah, I want to do something. I'll try and remember to maybe call this person, and then of course they forget and you never hear from them. So there were definitely some tips and tricks about different things you can do to help that in as far as marketing goes.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit later, maybe when we get into a later area of the podcast. But one of the things that I brought up during this thing that was important for me was getting all of this stuff into an automated system so that I don't have to remember to do that kind of thing. And so I like to have, I'm a really connected device kind of person, right? So I like my stuff to remind me what to do so that I don't have to remember how to do it, because I don't want to spend time worrying that I haven't followed up with something. Because I see people do that, and I never want to have to worry about that. So I've set up a lot of automated systems to do that kind of thing. So we talked about that a little bit. And one of the things that I think is just kind of a general feeling I get from the audience at large for that type of webinar is that, people are looking for answers, and they're looking for ways to get in front of other people out there. And so I think that's on the top of a lot of people's mind. How do I get noticed? I need work, and so I think that's probably, if you look at some of the people that we rub elbows with online, you can see that they're pretty good at that, because, and what I was saying on the webinar was, you've got to put yourself out there. You've got to put your ideas out there. You've got to put your hints and your tips. And you basically, I feel like it's like watching the Food Network. Those chefs are not afraid to give away their recipes. They give away their recipes every single day of the week, and they love cooking, and they love showing people how to cook. That's what architects have to do.
Well, I'm actually glad that you kind of brought that up, because one of the things that Eric was talking about was the architecture website. How do you guys actually? This was a question that everybody seems to ask. In our office, we've tried to revamp our website, a variety of different times. And it's, how do you see the website for an architecture firm or sole practitioner? How do you see that as part of your marketing strategy? Is it, as Eric was saying, simply a brochure? Is it something more interactive? Is it something, one of the previous interviewees that Eric had on there, Mark LePage, in his entrepreneurial architect, it seems very interactive with, his website. But it's not a typical architecture website where it's showing the 8 by 10 glossies It's more about trying to get feedback and stuff. So I'm just curious, what do you guys think is really kind of the proper use of a architectural website?
I don't think there's any right or wrong. Okay, wait a minute. Let me take a step back. If your website is based solely on Flash, that's wrong. Don't do that.
That's true. HTML5, man.
I know a certain website that's all Flash and that nobody can see it on their iPhones or iPads.
There you go.
Might be a firm I work for.
Okay, yeah, that's bad. Don't do that. But I think that your website, ultimately it is your brochure. It's what people go to find out a little bit more about you. So I think that's should be what your website does first. It needs to educate your viewers or your potential clients who you are, what do you do, what have you done, and then I think that's step one. And step two, which was something that Eric brought up, is that the website can also engage. It can offer information that can help
and
help
that's
somebody.
What I'm talking about with the chef thing. It's like there's things that we know that people would love to know, and it's not going to cost you anything. In fact, it's gonna build trust with people if you give that information away. We need to look at this as if we're teachers, and so like what you're talking about, Neal, when you are putting stuff out there that is useful for people. I mean, look at people flocking to Home Depot to watch somebody who works in the paint department how to sponge paint a wall for a Saturday class, Like, it's crazy, right? But people love to see how to do things that, we already know how to do, and we should be putting that kind of stuff up. And it's a great conversation starter, and it brings people back, say, oh, I wonder what other kind of tips they have,
Absolutely. Yeah. That's, I think that's the next step for every architect's website, that you can do that. And I think too that, to a certain extent, you have to look at your type of firm, and what you can offer or give tips or tricks or things for homeowners. I think from my perspective as being a sole practitioner and having a small office that, mainly deals working with other, with homeowners and such, that from my view, and one of the things I want to do with my website is start to offer some information like, what are the 5 steps or, some of the beginning things of how do you work with an architect? Some of that sort of information is something I want to eventually add to my site.
It's the same kind of stuff we're doing with this podcast, right? I mean, we're
very
showing
similar.
People behind the veil of what it's like in this industry, and why would you want to work with people? And there's a lot of great ideas in this industry, right. But if no one ever engages you about your ideas, then what good are they?
Exactly. I think, Evan, for a firm like yours, a larger firm, that may not, in that sense, make sense, to offer up maybe that information, but you have your clients and they have needs, and they have things that could be informational to them, and you can tailor that information for, a school project or something. What are the things that they need to know, or that they need, that they're curious? What does your firm offer? Special knowledge or information that you can share with them. And that can be shared either maybe through a blog or through other resources available, like a questionnaire or something like that may be available, on your website.
Yeah, we do all that through our blog, and there is a lot of good articles that go up there that are geared toward, school clients, hospital clients, healthcare, whatever. And it can be really helpful. The thing that I think bothers me the most about firm websites is when it's always you doing PR for yourself, and so it's all about patting yourself on the back. And that, to me, is you can go to those other, maybe it's a link that just goes to those places, but I don't think those need to be a standard occurrence on a blog. So those are that's when it really starts to grate on people, when it's like, look how great we are. Look how cool we are.
And you're right. And that's actually kind of, the whole premise behind, why we started doing this is that, when we talk about, architects and their approachability from the general public, people who are possibly looking to hire an architect or something, but, don't, because they don't really think that they could work with them, or that they're unapproachable and stuff like that. When they're looking and surfing at, architects in their area, and they're surfing on and, looking at these web pages that are all just kind of a pat, as you said, a pat on the back. It's just, look at me, look at me, look at me kind of thing. It's almost for people who are looking to hire an architect, sometimes it's a put off. I almost appreciate in some cases the people. I mean, Neal, your website's a great example. It's and I don't want to call it bare bones, but I mean, it's simplified to, hey, Mr. Client, this is who I am, this is what I can do for you, and let's try to work together. And those are actually the ones that are, to me, a lot of times, and I appreciate the glossy 8x10 glossies of all the pretty pictures of all the different projects and stuff. But that's me as an architectural professional, that I want to see pretty buildings. But if I'm somebody who's wanting to hire an architect, I want to know what you can do for me and why I should hire you. And I think in a way, websites sort of have to speak to that. I mean,
I think your website should reflect the place where you work. And architecture is not merely a final product. Architecture is its services, and it is a process built on top of that. And yes, there is keys you hand over in the end. Architects rarely do that. That's usually the contractor anyway. But I feel like, a really good firm who's really embedded in the work makes a mess. And so, like Neal was saying, there is no wrong way to do a website. I think it can show that process, and it can show the messiness of architecture, and it can show the artfulness of architecture. And it doesn't have to just be the glossy pictures, because I really feel like that's giving people a false sense of what they're getting. We don't just say, tell me what you want, and then voila, here it is. I mean, you go through this process together, and that's like a huge part of it, for me at least.
Oh yeah, I totally agree with you.
I would think that your website would want to reflect that.
Just the other day, we were sitting with a client at a construction trailer. We've got another 15, 16 months left on this project, but and the owner, she had come in with a high school student who was wanting to go into architecture, and I pulled out this big huge set of drawings, and just kind of slammed it on the table, saying,
for impact.
I was like, here's 5 years of my life.
Yeah.
And he kind of looked at me like, what? But then, the client and I started reminiscing about, everything that we've gone through to get to just this point, that Wednesday meeting, all of the things, that we've done and gone through. And it really is. I mean, I think that, that you're right, is probably to me, one of the most important things about the job is the process.
I think, Neal, on your site, you've been posting a couple of things lately, reminiscing. They're kind of nostalgic back to the early days of CAD, and that's fun for me to read. I think that's cool stuff that you're putting on your blog.
Well, it's just a little trip down memory lane, I guess, and to see how we got to, or how I got to where I am. And I've gotten a lot of positive feedback, because there's many other architects out there that have kind of gone through a similar process that I have done.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's been fun.
And he's getting up there in age too, so he's got to write it down, or he's going to forget it.
I remember when.
I tried not to make it sound that bad, but...
Well, back to the teaching thing, I have my website, getmethod.com, where I put tutorials and stuff out there, and I think that, this is I'm practicing what I'm preaching right now, where I like teaching people how to use this stuff. I mean, my whole bent on that site is that I want there to be better designers in the world. We need more great architecture. We don't need less of it. And that's one thing that always pisses me off is when architects are having these pissing matches. There's never room for more than 2 architects in a particular region. And that is exactly the opposite of the battle we should be fighting, which is, more great buildings that are responding to real problems, and less anonymous buildings that people don't even give the time of day. They're just happenstance. They just happen to be there, and you have to deal with them. Like going to the DMV. We need more. We need more great stuff. We need more great buildings. We need more great spaces that show you what architecture is capable of, how it could change your mood, and how it can bring back memories. When you hear the noises in that space or feel the walls. There's nothing like going into certain spaces and the first time you were there rushes back into your mind. And a lot of architecture can do that. Unfortunately, a lot of it doesn't. But I want to share what I know how to do so that it makes it easier for other people to do that. And then they can take it further than I have, because they get to that point quicker. And I think we need to do that as a profession. We need to be teaching people. And I'm not saying we're teaching people how to do our jobs for us, but I want to be able to share what we know. And we should be like a chef, like I was saying earlier. We should be Absolutely. Not afraid of people making our recipes, because, right. We have complete authorship over the things that we're doing. And it's definitely not an easy thing to do, but they're going to be more open to doing it with you.
Well, Evan, you have a great example that kind of ties the last 2 things we were just talking about, which is teaching, being able to share our knowledge and teach. And in addition to that, showing the process. And you mentioned actually on the interview, and we'll have a link to it in the notes, on your site, where you have a post called Evolution of Design. And I think that's a great example of a way to show potential clients, it's not just a pretty picture at the end. And here's the process of the design and the different things that were looked at. And in fact, I think actually even on my, I posted a picture of some time ago of some flimsy sheets where you can see the process of design actually in the sheets, where I took a sketch and kind of refined it, and the third version is kind of a nicer sketch of a design proposal. And so I think that's more what we need to be sharing with the public, to let them see what happens. I think the public sees construction. They'll see something under construction. They'll drive by it every day, and they'll slowly see it rise and the messiness involved in that, or maybe they've done a home remodel or something. But they don't really see the process of what we go through for design. I mean, we've often talked, maybe on this podcast or, on Twitter or something, that, we'll go through 50 different iterations of something and show the client the last one. Yeah. But they didn't see the day long, they'll look at it and go, wow, that's great. Well, change this. But I mean, it looks like, wow, why did that take you all day to do? Well, it didn't take me all day to do. It's the other 50 that took me the rest of the day to get to this one. Yeah. And I think that's something that's often missed, when it comes to architecture.
Yeah. One of the things that is great about architecture for me is during the process, I'm completely okay with not knowing the answer. And there's a lot of people out there who want everything figured out right away. And there's a lot of times when that just doesn't work. And I'm completely okay having things completely unresolved in a project, until I can figure it out, whenever that is. And that is part of that process as well. And a lot of times you'll go do a presentation for a client and they have questions, and the answer is, we're not there yet. There's these 3 other questions that we have to ask first before you can even ask that question. And that, to me, is part of educating the people you're working with. But there's people in our field who are guilty of that as well. They want everything figured out up front, and that's not. You want to go through the process of discovery and figuring these things out the best way. And one thing leads to another. And it's pretty amazing the path that these projects will take. And so it is pretty fun to document that process along the way.
And speaking of the process and documentation, we've been wanting you to talk about your 3D printing and our logo and some of the things that you've been doing that way. So let's kind of segue into something that we've been trying to get you to talk about for it seems 9 episodes.
You have to bribe me. Yeah.
I've got some extra beer here.
Okay. That was easy.
There you go.
So yeah, I mean, it was a design project that I took on to come up with kind of this little cityscape, and it was just something I did one night, and I had the opportunity to turn it into a real thing. And so this is nothing new. There's a lot of architects out there who run 3D printers 24 hours a day, but it was new for me. I haven't had the opportunity to do that yet. The types of modeling that I did when I was in school, I did learn how to do digital modeling then, but it was all analog output. So I would, be cutting chipboard models with an X-Acto knife, and I love that process. And then eventually we got into laser cutting, and so you'd build the 3D model, you'd lay it all out flat, and then you'd send that CAD file to a laser printer, and it would spit it out, and then you'd glue it all back together. And so now, obviously, we're at the point where 3D printing's a reality, and we can digitally design these things, and it really is the coolest thing to hold this thing in your hand and not have had to physically build it. And so it was a fun process to go through. I learned a lot. There's a lot of things and this is something I've thought of since I did the 3D print of the logo and the trophy, whatever you want to call it. And I think that 3D printing is kind of a buzzword. It's a popular thing right now to talk about. I think that people's expectations of what comes out of that printer are completely unrealistic, and I think that it's all marketing, because there's a lot of work that goes into these things. It's amazing, you guys, how much I've had to do and redo and rethink how to make these parts so that they print the most efficiently, so that I have to do the least amount of cleanup, so that the printer's capable of printing certain thicknesses versus solids versus shells and all this stuff. There's a lot. And then there's so many different types of 3D printers out there that they all do things a little bit differently. So the one that I printed on our in-house machine, and it took 23 hours to print these 4 parts. They all came out at the same time.
Wow.
And so yeah, I started it at lunch one day, and I came back at lunch the next day, and it was done. And so if you think about it that way, that's not a big deal. But and it probably would have taken a lot longer if I had done it. I don't even know if I could have built this thing by hand, analog. But there's other printers out there, like I'm actually having 10 of them made now, and they're taking about 12 hours on that printer, but it's a completely different look. It's instead of being kind of this resin that's hardened, it's the material comes on a spool, like fishing line, and it lays it down in a rope-like fashion. It heats it up, and it glues it to the layer below. It's really interesting. And then there's starch printers, and there's paper printers, and there's all these different methods. And so, there's going to be some models that you could make that might come out great with one style of printer, but might look like crap with another one. And then it all depends on, do you want it to be like finish quality, or is rough okay? Is a fast rough print going to be fine? If you go to like Morphosys website or their Morphopedia, I'm sure that there's tons of images because they iterate so quickly, and they're outputting 3D models all the time of the different forms, and they're real rough, but that's fine. It really depends what you're using it for. This one that I did was very fancy. I mean, it was like a 30 micron, which is super detailed, and it gets like nice sharp edges. It's amazing, versus like a CNC machine cutting out a piece of aluminum where it can only get so tight on the corner because you're using a physical bit to carve. You don't have that issue with this. I mean, the corners are perfectly perpendicular to each other, super sharp edges. It was very cool.
Was this a resin printer? Or
yeah, it's a resin printer. And then, when I was teaching at Cal Poly, we had starch printers, those models are super brittle. And then the one that I'm using now is the spool. So there's so many different kinds out there.
Now, where do you get access to these printers? I mean, does your company have them? I mean,
we have one, yeah, and it's the resin one, and they're not cheap. But now the one that I'm actually using to print the 10 copies on is a $2,000 MakerBot, and it's called the Replicator 2, and it's a desktop 3D printer, and it's made for consumers. And so they're working out the bugs and the kinks, and some friends of mine have one, and they're doing the printing for me. They're actually should give them a shout out. It's we'll put a link in the show notes, but my friends Haley and Hunter are doing the 10 prints for me on a Replicator 2, and they are running a little design studio out of San Diego called Symbiotic, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes. But they're working hard on it. There's definitely some issues with parts on the printer that they're trying to work out, but overall, it's really cool. That was a mouthful, but anyway, that technology is getting there, and I wish our in-house printer was going 24/7 because it's pretty funny. We had material left over in it that hadn't been used, and it expired. Quote unquote. There's an RFID chip inside the material, and the printer wouldn't use it anymore, so you just have to throw it away, and it's not cheap.
Yeah, I was going to say. I mean, so you were saying the $2,000 printer, but what about the medium? I mean, what?
Yeah, so the media on that one's pretty inexpensive because it's a spool of like filament. But the one that we have at the office it's a $50,000 printer. And it comes in these little jugs, and yeah, the computer reads them and says, "Oh, sorry, these are expired. Please buy some more from us."
Wow. So what do you see as the ultimate use for 3D printing in an architectural studio? Now I'm probably thinking more of the architectural studio of now, and probably not thinking far enough in advance of what is it going to be the studio of tomorrow. But I mean, what do you see is going to be the benefits of 3D printing in an architectural studio?
I think it really ties into the graduates who are coming out of school who are 3D modeling everything. And no longer are the days of a lot of analog modeling with X-Acto knives and glue and chipboard. I'm sure that's still happening, but the real benefit to this process is that it can be going all the time while people are modeling. They can be spitting out parts. And I think it's great for iterative design, small massing models, and for when you're really trying to work out different concepts that work on a site, because no matter what, clients love to see real things. It's way easier for them to grasp, even on a really small scale, their site in a physical model than it is on a computer screen, because the computer screen, it's so easy to get disoriented. And then also our clients typically are not educated in how to read a set of plans. They don't know what the heck they're looking at. And so I really feel like that's when these models come in, and that's where you get the biggest bang for your buck there.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's cool stuff.
So Evan, I don't remember if you had anything in the couple of images that you posted of our logo that you printed. How big is that?
It is, when it's together in a cube, it's 6.5 inches tall, 4 inches wide, and 4 inches deep. So it's 2 hands full.
Okay.
And that took about 23 hours. The one that, if I just took our material costs, it's probably $350, $400 to print that thing at the super high resolution. Whereas these lower resolution ones are, more like half that cost. And they're gonna still look great, but they're just not as high gloss of a finish.
Now, is that a material you can paint, or?
Sure.
Oh, you can. Okay.
Yeah. Yep, it's paintable. It doesn't require any kind of finishing. In fact, it's so hard that we use a really high-powered pressure washer to clean it off, because there's 2 different types of materials when you're printing. There's the actual resin for the model, and then it has this filler material that it uses to support cantilevers. So when it's printing up, and if you have a deck cantilevering off, it actually has to build up the entire area underneath that with solid material, but it's kind of a gelatinous material that you then clean out.
Oh,
and so
wow.
you scrape a lot of it out, but then you also can pressure wash it out. And so like right out of the printer, the material is really hard, and you want to get the gelatinous stuff out of there because it will harden over time. Yeah, totally is. Well, have you guys seen, I don't know if you've seen on like ArcDaily or Architizer, there are building size 3D printers where they're kind of like these things on wheels, and they roll around and they're 3D printing. Like there was this one example of a complex curving wall. So it curved back and forth, but as it went up, it also curved in 2 or 3 different directions. And this thing would just kind of drive down the street printing one layer, and then it would come back and print the next layer. And so it was all computer controlled, but it was able to build this thing that would have been super hard to build. I mean, lots of math involved. It would have taken a ton of support, some kind of scaffolding to build it. I mean, you guys have seen pictures of Gaudi's Sagrada Familia, to do stuff like that with, the cathedral full of scaffolding. It's the same idea, but you don't, when they're 3D printing these buildings, they're not having to do all that. And it takes a long time, but, it's an R&D effort. They're trying to figure it out still, but it's pretty cool.
Speaking of the Sagrada Familia, I used to work at the Salvador Dali Museum down in St. Petersburg, Florida. And shout out to the old Dali. But they actually they did a exhibition on all of the Catalonian artists, architects, and things like that of Dali's time. And they actually had the original model of Sagrada Familia that Gaudi and his shop made. Awesome. It was this big, enormous, probably good 7-8 feet tall plaster model. It was absolutely gorgeous, and you other than the color, you could actually see that it looked. It was a perfect representation of it. But I could just imagine, nowadays, Gaudi having those tools.
Oh yeah.
And
what's amazing is there was a 60 Minutes thing with Gaudi's. A special on Sagrada Familia, and how they are just recently coming up with technology to build the things that he had planned for.
Oh, yeah.
And that, when I went to that church when I was over there once, and they had on display the inverted models. Have you guys seen these, where they're made out of string or chain?
Yes.
And so they hang it from a platform, and that's how they figured out the parabolic curves for the vaults, and it's just a natural gravity curve, but it's upside down. It's so cool. Very cool stuff.
I actually attended church service in the Sagrada Familia one when I was there. They had a little chapel off to the side of the actual main building, which was still under construction, or is still under construction.
200 years later.
Yeah, not quite that long, but
that's so awesome.
So it's a great building actually. If you're there in Barcelona, go visit it. It's definitely worth it.
Absolutely. Super highlight.
To wrap up on the 3D thing, I'm curious. I am just totally ignorant of any of that. How large of a printer for what you were doing in your office? How large of a printer is this thing?
It sits on a table, so it's there's some that have their own stands, but they have what's called a build size, and there's like a bed inside the printer that can build different dimensions, and every printer is a little bit different, and so. There's some printers where you would only be able to print out one little piece at a time, and you would have to assemble it. And then there's other printers where you can build the whole thing all at once. So this one, I could build all 4 parts, but I couldn't build them all at once. I had to actually, you can look at pictures on the website of this thing, but and we'll have it in the links to the show. But I printed it in 4 parts, and then 2 parts glued together for one side and 2 parts glued together for the other side. I had to make it like that to be efficient with the material. But I printed all 4 parts at one time. There are some printers that, they don't have a very big build bed. And so this one sits on top of like a standard folding table. It's probably 4 feet wide, 3 feet deep, 3 feet tall, this printer in particular. The one that I'm having the other copies printed on now is half that size. It's smaller, but it still has the same size build bed in it. So I can still have the whole thing printed at once, but it's not as big of an overall machine. I mean, the one that I have, it's interesting because they have computers in them, and you actually have to just set the file up on another machine, get it all set up, make sure it's going to work, figure out how much material it's going to take, and all that kind of stuff. And then you send the file to the printer, and it has its own little computer in it, and it figures out what to do with it once it's there. Like the one that it's being printed on now, you just plug an SD card into it with the file on it, and it just prints like like those little printers that you shove your SD card in to print photos out of. It works the same way.
So what? What can you send? What do you send to the printer?
It's a 3D file format.
Is it a proprietary type of thing, or something that SketchUp or some other 3D program could just output to?
No, you can make it in many different. You can make these things in Rhino, FormZ, Bonsai, SketchUp, Revit, ArchiCAD. It doesn't really matter. You can use just about anything. 3D Studio. You have to save it usually out as an STL file, which is a 3D file format that is for 3D printers. It's a stereolithography file format, which is the fancy word for 3D printing. And then the printer can read that, and it figures out the orientation that the part needs to be to build it on the build tray. It's getting easier over time on how to do this stuff, but yeah, it's just a 3D file format that you're sending to the printer. And it has to be checked for material thickness. It has to be made sure that the geometry is all correct, that there's no holes in it, stuff like that. So there's different pieces of software out there that can do the automatic checking and stuff for you ahead of time.
Wow.
So,
whole new world.
Like I said, it was a big learning experience, but it was fun, and it's pretty cool to be able to do this stuff. It's like architecture. When structural steel starts going up and you walk into it and you're like, I can't believe this thing is real. They took this thing that was on paper that I was designing 3 years ago, and here it is, and that's the best feeling in the world. That's what this is on a smaller scale. It's just unbelievable that you can design something in the computer, and the next day you can be holding it. It's amazing.
I tell you, this will be the future of the construction industry. I mean, you were talking earlier about building size 3D printers, and I remember reading probably on Arc Daily. They were showing shelters being built with 3D models, and smaller shelters, but I could see that could be the way that we design, just a quick translation, from design to construction, all at the click of the keyboard.
God, I hope not. Jeez.
No, I've even heard, and this is probably far out there, but maybe sending a 3D printer to Mars so that it can print buildings or structures that astronauts could live in, or maybe it builds something else so that an astronaut can get back. I don't know. This is probably far in the future, but what an interesting concept. I mean, wow. I mean, amazing. This is just kind of probably the early phases of this.
It's probably something that technology is moving pretty quickly. We'll probably see it at the end of our lifetime. Neal, yours obviously sooner than most.
Thank you, Cormac. Thank you.
Wow.
Nice to throw me under the bus there. All right, I'll take it. I'll take it.
Well, speaking of buses and Gaudi, oops. But I think it's going to be interesting to watch it. I mean, I heard the comment, God, I hope not, from you, Evan, and you're right. I mean, because one of the things that we always talk about is the craft that both in the building and, drawing and the process and everything else, that, the really tactile, things that you can kind of get down and dirty with, and as you were saying, you don't have to actually get in there to physically build this. I mean, you're putting in the man hours in the computer and, setting up the printer and everything. But other than that, it's all a hands-off process. So, it'll be interesting to kind of see, because, you said it that, people are graduating, coming out, and they're doing these 3D prints rather than, physically building 3D models, where they are pulling out the, chipboard and, metal rulers and X-Acto blades and stuff like that. And, never going to know the pain of almost cutting your thumb off.
I thought that was the joy.
There's two things that really bug me about this. Even though I am doing it. Number one is our offices are way too clean now. Everybody's stuck behind a screen all the time. Yeah. And we're not making things with our hands. We're still making things, but we're not making things analog, right? For the most part.
Right.
And that bugs me because there's something that needs to stay tactile about architecture, even when it's in an office being thought up. And then it further disconnects us from building the real building. It's already too bad that we're not out there working with our hands. And, I have my own shop that I fabricate things in, and I weld, and I've got, radial arm saws and chop saws and all that kind of stuff. I like to make things. And that's one of the reasons I like architecture so much, is because it's making things even on a bigger scale. And so again, I feel like we are further disconnecting ourselves from the making of the architecture. We cannot forget that, at least for now, buildings are the biggest thing that are completely made by hand. And I think if we further move into the cubicle behind the screen mentality of not getting our hands dirty, I think that we're furthering that gap, and that's not a good thing.
I totally agree with you because, one of the things, how did you guys learn, architecture? A lot of it was, hands-on practice of getting out there, not just, building the 3D models or the physical models that we're talking about, but also getting out there and, experiencing the, tactile, just the physical experience of getting out there in a building and finding out what's right and what's wrong, but then being able to kind of like look at the things that you see that are out there and built, and then when you're trying to build them, albeit with the X-Acto blade and the straight edges and all that other stuff, but you're trying to get in there, and to me that kind of helps you understand how to translate everything that's kind of going on in your mind about what you want to, the stage that you want to set for the experience and the feelings that you're hoping to generate from these, from the buildings and the movements that you're doing within these buildings. But, you kind of start to be one with some of those spaces when you're, kind of physically building them, even in the, in the smaller scale. And to kind of, like you're saying, to further detach yourself from that, you're almost wondering, and it's like, people who go in, they start, designing stuff without going out and visiting the site, things like that, without, truly understanding what's going on. To me, that kind of further detaches you from, being able to kind of create that fully competent building, because you're not truly understanding what everything else is going on. And so I think you're right on that.
Yeah. There's no hours in the job for you to be going out and visiting the site.
There never is, but
oh
you have to.
You would think, yeah.
Well, speaking of that, Cormac, we were talking pre-show about digital and taking notes. Why don't you share that, and that'll kind of lead us into our last part of the show here.
Well, it almost seems, or at least it's getting to the point where it almost seems commonplace that, architects and contractors and owners and people like that, especially in larger projects and commercial projects and stuff like that. They come well equipped to the job site, iPad or laptop in tow and stuff like that. And I just happen to be working for one of those firms that, as of right now, we're slowly making a change, to get to at least, it'll be another topic that we get to, especially, Evan, you talked about it a lot, in the webcast about, the kind of like the digital organizer. And we're finally getting to a point where we're starting to do a project management software that, is going to make organizing, tracking, and, everything else with the projects far easier. It was a project software that I used to use a long time ago, and thankfully they're getting to the point where we've already bought our seats. They're doing all of the transfer of all of our files and getting them squared away within this database system. But so I'm out on the site. Everybody's taking their notes and everything on their iPads and stuff like that. And after the meeting was over with, the owner and the contractor started kind of harassing me because, I don't have a laptop. I don't have an iPad. They're asking me questions. And I'm like, well, it's almost like, my feeling of when you're during the design process and you don't know how to sketch, but you're sitting in front of a client and they're like, well, I was thinking about this. And it's like, what, I understand what you're saying, but let me go back to the office. I'll draft it up in the computer and then I'll send it to you and see what you think. And that's a lost opportunity when you pull out a piece of paper and you sit down and you draw it up in front of them and you talk back and forth and you have that whole conversation. And, boom, you've got an idea back, and then you go back and, do your drafting and all that other stuff. But, so they were asking me about some, RFI questions and some tracking of a couple of submittals and things like that. And if I would have had a laptop or if I would have had an iPad or something like that, I would have easily been able to pull it up, tell them exactly what was going on, possibly even answered it right then and there. But kind of at a handicap. And, I kind of listened to them basically sort of ridicule me for about a good half hour about the lack of, my lack of mobility. And, that's really kind of where, even with 3D printers and everything else, I mean, that's where the world's going to, and we've got to, kind of embrace it and move forward. And
there's detriment to that too. I'm torn because we are living in this connected world where our phones are constantly beeping and buzzing, and we are able to check email at a moment's notice and pull up spreadsheets. And, I think there's something to be said for being able to tell a client or an owner that, let me think about that. Let me process that. And then maybe we'll get back together and figure out ideas. I think you're using the case of, you need to find some information that is digital. And so, yeah, it would be great if you could pull that up at a moment's notice.
That was more of what the
if
point
you can, at the same time, what I'm trying to say is it's like we have gotten to the point where things are so efficient and so available that we don't have time to think about things anymore either.
Exactly. I agree with you there. There's been a point there, we've gotten to the point of it's like, want it now, want it now, want it now.
Right.
And you're just like, well, let me stop and think for a second. Let me, because, it was
it's the drive-through mentality, man. That's what I call it.
It is absolutely, it's that, my wife and I like to talk about, the 30-second soundbite type thing. It's if you don't get what you need within that 30 seconds, and now it's actually probably down to 3 seconds, they're going to move on to the next, to the next way of getting the information and stuff. But, you actually brought that up, the over-connectability in a way. So here we are sitting in this job trailer yesterday, and we have everybody's there. Everybody's got their smartphones. A handful of people have got, the iPads and stuff like that. And I don't really know if they actually paid attention to. I mean, this was a contractor kickoff meeting. it's a construction management, managed job, and all of the prime contractors were there. We were talking about all the rules and regulations, and
everyone's got their phone under the desk.
And everybody's, well, some of them weren't even, that shy. They were bold. They had it right in front of them, and they were looking at it. And nobody was really truly paying attention, and there was no real eye contact, and there was no, I understand exactly what you're saying. It's just like, well, I hope it's more like, I really hope that those meeting minutes are really comprehensive, because I didn't pay attention to half of it.
Well, you need a strong leader in those, and you need to have a no grazing policy. Phones go in a basket at the door, and you can pick it up when you're on your way out. It's a hard thing, but you're right. It's one of those. It's crazy that people do that in a meeting that you're spending your time or wasting your time at, as the case may be. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I had I have another project manager who works on another school project from the owner, and she if she hears even your phone buzz, she'll stop the whole meeting and say, "Go ahead, take your time. It's I can back charge you for that." I mean, and when you start threatening their money and stuff, and she can do that because there's actually she's got she's got the power, and I appreciate the fact that she wants to make everybody pay attention to what's going on. I kind of wish that she would make them read the RFIs, my RFI responses closely. Yeah. Or look at the documents. But anyway,
Well, now that I've slammed the whole bringing digital devices into meetings and stuff, I can tell you what my favorite thing to do with them is. And I have an article on my site about using the iPad as a presentation tool. And I'll tell you, it's one of the most gratifying experiences when you can put the project in your client's hands. If you don't have a physical model, man, their eyes light up, and it's awesome to be able to hand them an iPad that they already know how to use. And there's a 3D model of their project in there, no matter what stage it's in, and they can spin it around with their fingertips. Yeah. And it is a great experience. It's a very connecting experience between you as the designer and them as your client, and this is the thing that you guys have made together. That is a really cool thing to be able to do with these devices, and it's not me showing them; it's them showing themselves. Yeah, they're looking at what they want to look at.
They're fully immersed into it. It's as interactive as if they had a pencil in their hand.
Yep.
Well, let me ask you this: since we do talk a lot to students and recent graduates, would-be people who want to go through the torture of architecture school and stuff. So here we are, we're coming to the, end of another college school year. Going to have a lot more people graduating and entering the workforce. What do you guys think about the digital portfolio?
Yeah, we talked about this before. I don't remember if it was episode 1 or 2 or 3 maybe, but I think it's great. I don't think that there's any need necessarily for a full printed portfolio anymore. You might want to have a leave behind, and I think we mentioned that before too. That's a small, really nice handout that is kind of your calling card, but it also shows some of your imagery. But I think the digital portfolio on an iPad, especially where people can again kind of flip through it at their leisure and look at the things they want to look at. I think it's great. There's a lot of information that you can embed in those things that you just couldn't do on paper, right? So you can embed animation, you can embed interactive kind of media, and you can have pop-up text. So if you want to have full screen image, and then they tap a button and text pops up that people can scroll through and read or ignore if they want to. I think that all that stuff is great. I don't see any downside to
it. And I like the, and we were talking about it with the client, and I think that, it's also a good tool to use for, a would-be employer is, do you understand how to, at least design or, pay attention to the 360-degree building and not just one facade or another facade. I mean, and have them be able to basically spin it around and, kind of go inside and peek around and just, kind of I understand that people are graduating and they're not, fully immersed into all the different things that they need to kind of put a building together, but, be able to, at least display to somebody that, they've got that 3D working knowledge of being able to translate a design from, the plan paper all the way up to, basically a 3D model and kind of understand how to translate all of that stuff. So I think, it's a great tool. In fact, I know somebody who's going to be going on some interviews soon, and she was asking me about, printing stuff out and things like that. And we really didn't talk about, the digital that much. But I think it might actually be, because again, as I've said, and we've all said, that's where the state of the architectural profession's going. So
you have to know your audience. If you're
true,
you got to know who you're going to be presenting to. And so if that's something you think that they're going to be interested in, yeah, you want to show it. If not, then you might want to stay away from that. If they're old school, you might want to go in there with an old school portfolio.
Well, but what if you're going to an old school firm that needs to, wants to, or maybe
I don't
they
know
don't.
If you do that in an interview.
I was going to say, maybe they don't want to go new school yet, or maybe they don't know how to, and they're hiring somebody that can help them.
Yeah,
I think you can tell that in the whether it's a job app or not an application, but the posting for the job. I think you're going to get a feel for what they're looking for, and you can kind of make a judgment call. I think the thing to be careful of is you have one iPad. You're not likely to walk in with 3 iPads, and you may be likely interviewed certainly more than one person. And so I think recent grads or soon to be grads, need to be aware of that you probably need to have like maybe your best stuff in a small paper portfolio that you can hand out, and then use the digital to kind of show the animations and supplement, and maybe start with that, and then you can have the handouts. And those are ones Evan, you just mentioned, those are your leave behinds. So it's not very expensive to do or to print out. And those are your leave behinds. You'd leave them there, and you can show off the stuff on the iPad. And then that's probably a way to do that. For me in my practice, I started using the iPad actually right after it first came out. So I remember very clearly, actually, one of the first client interviews I went to, I took the iPad instead of taking a bunch of drawings or photographs in a book or something, and I just put scans of drawings and or photographs from projects, and I put them all in the Photos app. At the time, this was pretty early on, and just using the Photos app, just
works great.
Walked through some imagery to show them, because we spent probably all of 30 seconds looking at it, but you show them 2 or 3 photos or a plan or 2, and you're kind of done. In this case, we were walking through an existing house that we were going to remodel, and
I've done that too, and it's great to show example imagery in there too of inspirational or things that you could be thinking of to convey a mood. Well, that isn't work that you've done.
Right,
even. It could just be stuff that you've lifted and that
you
want to show off.
Something we talked about it actually in the interview that we did on Eric Bobrow's site on the best practices course, is the website House. And I talked a little bit about how I used it, but I also use it in a way that exactly what you just mentioned, Evan, which was, I'll pull up imagery on House and I'll create what they call an idea book, and that has imagery that talks or that shows the client, some of the things that we talked about, and shows what they have. So, it's a really great way to show a client and to talk about stuff you're trying to show them in a digital fashion. So, it's great. It's a great thing to do. And one of the things we wanted to mention here as we start to wrap up here is there's a website called Archispeak, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah, that's right.
And they recently published a series of articles called The Ultimate iPad Guide. And in that series of articles, and we'll have a link in the website to that summarizes all the different articles that were published. But it talks about or shows examples of different apps and how they're used, and all the way from presentation to marking up drawings to project management, and generating even things like letters and things and spreadsheets and stuff like that. So it's a great resource that I found going through all the different articles that can pinpoint to help people find the apps that can do some of these things with these more digital tools that we have today.
Yeah, cool stuff. One other thing I wanted to go back to when talking about maybe interviewing at a firm. The most important thing that I think you can do when you're interviewing for a firm is showing the firm that you can think spatially. And if there are ways that you can convey that digitally or analog, bring a model in if it's analog, bring your drawings in if they show that you can do that, because that's what people want to know.
Yes.
Is how do you think spatially? Can you convey through presentation, through explanation, through walking somebody through a space, what you were trying to achieve spatially? That is super important. So figure out how to do that. Do not, or I shouldn't say do not, but try not to let the conversation come down to what software do you know? Because we all know that we can learn any piece of software out there, and the concepts are very similar between all of them. When you're in school, you might have been forced to use a certain piece of software by a certain instructor, and that really shouldn't matter. What's really important is that you can do architecture. And so, it always bugs me when people start talking about software and, Revit and SketchUp, and like, who the hell cares? I mean, they're tools.
Right.
You've got to be able to do the job, and however you can do that job, do it. And so if you think that it's better to show that you can think spatially on an iPad in a presentation, do it. If you think it's better that you can do it with a physical model, bring it. I think that that's something that I would definitely encourage people to do is try to figure out what you're passionate about, show how you can convey that in an interview, and I'm sure you'll do perfectly fine.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up this episode, guys. So if you have any questions or comments, the best way to reach us is at the website at archispeak.com and
Archispeak Podcast.
Archispeak Podcast. Oh my gosh. I wrote that.
Don't go to that other
site. Wow.
He should have wrote it down. Gramps is getting old.
Yes, that's right. Yes, another old joke. Thank you very much, Cormac. On the archispeakpodcast.com website, you'll find links to our Twitter accounts where you can reach us individually, or our Archispeak Twitter account, and also on Facebook at facebook.com/archispeakpodcast. And if you enjoy the show, please leave us some reviews on iTunes. That really helps spread the word for the show, and we like positive reviews. That's why I said if you like the show. If you don't like the show, just disregard that comment.
That's right.
All right, guys.
All right, we'll see you next week.
Okay.
See you guys.
All right, bye.
Bye.
You have to walk it, you can start now, or you can hang your head in despair.